chapter 6, entitled Reworking Your Goals, Tripp is going to give us a little bit more building on this. Okay, your parental goal should be glorify God and enjoy him forever. So we're going to see a lot of these strawmans or these either or thinking. So basically saying, if you are choosing an activity, like he uses example of sports to teach a child self-esteem, it's either that or following God. You know, basically saying these sort of activities or concern for a child's self-esteem is teaching them to trust themselves and not to trust God. And I think really leaves people looking for more of those rigid rules, because there's no capacity to say, well, maybe it depends on the child whether a sports activity is going to be a problem or a help. And again, there's very little positive framing with any of his anecdotes. It's always only the negative. So even, you know, if we want to torture this one example he uses about Little League, but what are the positive things? Is a child learning how to love others on a team? Are they learning discipline and self-control in participating in a team sport? Are they learning diligence and showing up? You know, all the kind of things that if we really want to overthink and scrutinize our decisions, a lot of these examples that are being given are wholly one-sided. The thread that begins to show up at this point in the book and carries on throughout, where Ted begins to grapple with, well, what about children who aren't saved? Because up until this point, he's kind of presenting a simplistic case that says, you know, either a person is idolatrous or submitted to the Lord. They're either that figure bent over, bowing to idols, or straight up obedient to the Lord. And say elsewhere that true righteousness, true godly living is beyond human capacity and requires empowering of the Holy Spirit. So the standards that children are going to be held to are supernatural standards in that sense. And the idea would be children achieve godliness, trusting that that's the work of the Holy Spirit and giving glory to Jesus when that happens. But the question remains, and I think he's rightly anticipating these objections. Well, what about children who aren't believers? And what does this practically mean? Because that can be a kind of a Christianese word salad, right? That can mean, okay, well, if I do something good and I'm not a Christian, or if I do something that is godly, is that me? Is that the Holy Spirit? Like, how does that actually work? And what does it mean if parents are requiring their children to do godly things? Is that the Holy Spirit's work or not? And so Ted really says that I found it a really unsatisfactory answer. On page 55, he just says, do you suppose we should teach unbelievers to disobey the law of God? God's standard is basically saying God's standard is applicable to all, whether they believe. So a parent's job should be to faithfully hold out God's standard. And I think he gives an example of a child who was feeling angry and felt wronged by a teacher, and then needed prayer and God's help to respond with kindness and grace to this teacher. So I think what Ted never gets into is, well, how's that supposed to practically work for a child who's maybe not a believer, or even a child who is a believer? So what is going on if a parent is saying, no, we require you to respond kindly to this teacher? That's just a behavioral requirement that a child can achieve. So is that the work of the Holy Spirit? Is that supernatural? What's actually going on there? So he doesn't ever really address this beyond naming that maybe it's a little bit different for a believer or unbeliever.